She was the one they forgot to look at. 17 years of mending her sister's dresses, 17 years of staying in the back pew, 17 years of mirrors turned to face the wall because some things you don't need to see twice. The whole town of Coldwater Crossing knew why Colt Hargrove had come riding in. The richest rancher in Bitterroot Valley needed a wife. Every mother had brushed her daughter's hair. Every daughter had pressed her best dress. And every single person from the first pew to the last knew he would choose Iris Holt. The beautiful one, the golden one, the one worth choosing. No one looked at Eliza. No one ever did. But Colt Hargrove wasn't looking at Iris. He was looking at the woman in the brown dress standing half hidden behind the old oak at the edge of the churchyard. The woman with the scar that climbed from her collar to her cheek. The woman who wasn't trying to be seen and was the only person in that entire crowd he could not stop watching. He had seen her before. 5 years ago on a road outside of town when no one else was watching. He had never forgotten her face. Stay with me until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. She hid her scars in the back pew. The richest rancher walked past everyone and chose her. Eliza Holt woke before the sun. This was not unusual. Eliza had been waking before the sun for as long as she could remember, since the fire certainly, but perhaps even before that, when waking early was still a habit of industry and not a habit of survival. She dressed in the dark. Her fingers knew the path of every button, every hook, every worn patch on her brown wool dress. She had been dressing in darkness for 17 years. Her hands had learned what her eyes no longer needed. The mirror in the corner of the small bedroom she shared with her stepsister Iris was turned to face the wall. Eliza had turned it herself years ago. There were some things you only needed to see once. In the kitchen, she started the fire, set the coffee on, and began mixing biscuit dough before Iris stirred. This was her life. The arithmetic of it was simple. She woke, she worked, she made herself useful, and in return she was permitted to stay. In the Holt household, or what remained of it, which was Ruth Holt's household, now Eliza's stepmother's domain, usefulness was the only currency that bought a roof over your head. Eliza was very useful. Eliza. Ruth Holt appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed, already sour-faced, her gray hair pinned back with the precision of a woman who had decided long ago that softness was a weakness she could not afford. The blue dress needs pressing before church. Iris caught the hem on the fence post yesterday. I'll see to it. And make sure you wear your good shawl. Ruth's eyes moved as they always did, inevitably the way water finds a downward slope to the scar on Eliza's neck. To the place where the skin had healed wrong, puckered and pale, climbing up from her collar toward the left side of her face. Colt Hargrove is coming today. We don't want to give the wrong impression. Eliza said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not make things worse. Ruth left. Eliza finished the biscuits, pressed Iris's blue dress, fed the chickens, checked the water level in the well, and balanced the household accounts all before breakfast was on the table. The accounts were in bad shape. They had been in bad shape for 2 years, ever since Eliza's father had died and left the household in Ruth's hands. But there was a detail in the numbers that Eliza had been staring at for 3 weeks, something that didn't add up no matter how many times she checked it. A parcel of land, 40 acres in the valley bottom, the best grazing land her father had owned, recorded as sold in 1870. She had found the entry in the old ledgers buried between receipts for seed and harness leather. Sold to a third party, cash transaction. No name recorded, no witness signature. Her father had never mentioned selling that land. He had spoken of it often. It had been his father's land and his grandfather's before that, as something that would pass to Eliza someday, along with whatever else was worth inheriting. He had spoken of it the way men speak of things they believe are safe. But the land was gone. And Ruth had never explained where the money from the sale had gone because Ruth had never spoken of it at all. Eliza closed the ledger when she heard Iris on the stairs. Clara, have you seen my ribbon, the blue one? Eliza had stopped correcting Iris about her name years ago. It was Eliza, not Clara. Clara had been their mother's name, and Ruth had taken to calling Eliza by it as a kind of cruelty, and Iris had picked up the habit without malice, the way children pick up everything from the adults around them. It wasn't worth fighting about. Top drawer left side, Eliza said. Iris appeared in the kitchen, radiant even in her nightdress, her golden hair loose around her shoulders, her blue eyes bright with the particular excitement of a young woman who believes today might be the day everything changes. She was 24 to Eliza's 32. She was the kind of beautiful that stopped conversations. Isn't it wonderful? Iris spun in a little circle, grabbed a biscuit from the plate without asking. Colt Hargrove is coming to church today. Everyone says he's looking for a wife. She pressed the biscuit to her lips and smiled over it. He'll choose me, of course. Who else would he choose? She said it without cruelty. That was the thing about Iris. She was not unkind, not precisely. She was simply thoughtless in the way that beautiful people who have never been overlooked are thoughtless. She genuinely could not imagine the question having any other answer. Eliza poured her own coffee and said nothing. The church bells rang at 10 o'clock. Eliza walked 3 steps behind her family, as was the custom, as was the unspoken arrangement. Ruth moved at the front, her chin high, her smile arranged for public consumption. Iris floated beside her, resplendent, in the blue dress Eliza had pressed. Eliza followed her, brown wool, sensible and invisible, her good shawl pulled up to cover the scar on her neck. Coldwater Crossing had turned out in force. Every family within 20 miles had found a reason to attend Sunday service. The churchyard was bright with pressed Sunday clothes and whispered speculation. Eliza heard her name as she passed. Poor Eliza. Poor dear. It's such a shame about the fire. She was pretty before. Wasn't she? The younger one turned out well, though, and she kept her eyes forward and her chin level. She had learned long ago that showing pain only invited more of it. Inside the church, she slid into the back pew. Ruth and Iris arranged themselves near the front where the light was good and visibility was optimal. The service began. Eliza let the words wash over her. She knew them all by memory. 17 years of Sundays had a way of settling scripture into your bones whether you wanted it there or not. She did not pray exactly. She was not sure she believed in prayer anymore. But she sat quietly and thought about the ledger entry and the 40 acres and the way numbers had a way of telling truths that people had decided to keep hidden. Then the doors opened. The man who walked in was not what she had expected, though she was not sure what she had expected. The story said Colt Hargrove was the richest rancher in the valley, that his land ran to the horizon in 3 directions, that he had been engaged once and jilted and had not looked at a woman since. The stories made him sound like a monument, solid, imposing cold. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair with gray threading through it the way a river threads through stone, not evenly but inevitably. His coat was good wool but worn at the cuffs. His boots were the boots of a man who worked his own land. His face was all hard plains and careful stillness, the face of a man who had decided a long time ago not to let the world see what it had done to him. His eyes swept the congregation. Eliza looked away immediately. She had learned that too, the art of not being looked at, of making yourself small and unremarkable, of disappearing into the background, where no one could see you and therefore no one could hurt you. But she felt it when his gaze passed over her, and she felt it when it stopped. She looked up because she could not help it. Colt Hargrove was looking at her, not at Iris, not at any of the young women in the front pews who had arranged themselves so carefully to be seen. He was looking at Eliza, at the woman in the brown dress in the back pew, at the woman with the scar on her neck and the coffee still warm in her hands from making breakfast before dawn. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been trying to remember for a very long time. Eliza looked away first. The service ended. The congregation spilled into the churchyard, snow-dusted shoulders and hats. Women pulled their shawls tighter. Men stamped their feet against the cold. Ruth maneuvered Iris directly into Colt Hargrove's path with the precision of a woman who has been practicing this moment in her mind for weeks. "Mr. Hargrove," Ruth's voice carried, "how wonderful to see you back in Coldwater Crossing. You remember my daughter Iris, of course." Iris curtsied. Her smile was dazzling. Her golden hair caught the winter light like something out of a painting. Colt's expression did not change. His eyes moved to Iris, took her in with the thoroughness of a man assessing livestock, not unkindly, but without pretense, and then moved on. "Miss Holt," he said. Then to Ruth, "I was hoping to speak with your other daughter." Silence. Complete, encompassing, churchyard-swallowing silence. Ruth blinked. "I'm sorry." "Your other daughter." Colt's gaze had already moved past Iris, past Ruth, scanning the dispersing crowd. "Eliza, isn't it?" Eliza was standing 30 feet away, half hidden behind the old oak tree at the edge of the churchyard, and she felt the entire town turn to look at her. She could not move, could not breathe. This was a joke. It had to be a joke, some elaborate cruelty she didn't understand the mechanism of yet. Men like Colt Hargrove didn't come to small-town churches to choose women like Eliza Holt. But Colt Hargrove's face held no mockery, just that same hard patience waiting. She stepped forward. The crowd parted. She felt their stares like needles. She was used to stares, had been used to stares for 17 years. But these were different, confused, almost offended, as if she had done something wrong simply by being chosen. She stopped in front of Hiermer, close enough to see the lines around his eyes, close enough to see the old scar on his lower lip, a small one, the kind a man gets from a fist in his younger years. Close enough to see that his hands were genuinely rough, genuinely worked. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. "Miss Holt?" He tipped his hat. "I wonder if I might call on you this week. A business matter if you're willing." Behind her, she heard Iris's sharp intake of breath, heard Ruth's strangled protest, heard the whispers building like a coming storm. Eliza looked at this man, this stranger who had just upended the arrangement of her entire world with a single sentence, and felt something she had almost forgotten she was capable of feeling. Curiosity. "All right," she said quietly. "You may call." He nodded. "Tomorrow afternoon." Then he walked away, leaving chaos in his wake. The walk home was a nightmare. Ruth's fury was cold and precise. "What did you say to him? What did you do?" "I've done nothing. I've never spoken to the man in my life. This is some kind of mistake. It has to be. Why would a man like Colt Hargrove want anything to do with you?" Iris didn't speak at all. Her face was closed, her eyes bright with something that was not quite grief and not quite anger, that complicated emotion of someone who has been promised a thing their entire life and has just watched it given to someone else. Eliza said nothing. There was nothing to say. She didn't understand it either. That night she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind off the mountains, and turned the question over in her mind like a stone she couldn't put down. He had looked at her in the church. Before he had even spoken to Ruth, before anyone had pointed her out or named her, he had looked at her. Like recognition, like he had been looking for her specifically and had found what he was looking for. She did not sleep. Colt Hargrove arrived at precisely 2 o'clock the following afternoon. Eliza met him in the parlor. Her hands were folded in her lap to hide the fact that they were not entirely steady. Ruth had positioned herself in the doorway, ostensibly arranging flowers in the hallway, until Colt's pointed silence made clear she was not welcome, and she retreated with visible reluctance. They sat across from each other, the fire between them, snow tapping at the windows. "I'll be direct," Colt said. "Please. My father died 7 months ago. His will states that I must marry within 1 year of his death, or I forfeit my inheritance to my cousin Decker." He paused. "I have 5 months remaining." Eliza absorbed this. "And you want to marry me?" "I want a business arrangement, not a love match." His eyes were steady on hers, the color of dark river water. "I've had love. It nearly destroyed me. I have no interest in experiencing that again." "You want a wife who won't expect feelings." "I want a partner, someone practical, someone who understands this is a transaction, not a romance." He paused. "I've watched you, Miss Holt, at church, in town. I've seen how you manage your household while others take credit. I've seen you work harder than anyone in that family and ask for nothing. You've been watching me. I notice things, and yet you chose me." She kept her voice flat, factual. "Not Iris, not any of the women who spent months making themselves noticeable. I chose you because I believe we can be honest with each other." His jaw was tight. "Because you understand what it means to survive without hope. Because I don't think you'll leave me for a better offer." The words landed precisely. She felt them bruise. "You chose me because I'm safe," she said. "Because I'm scarred and plain and unlikely to have other options." He didn't flinch. "I chose you because I think you're the only person in this county who won't try to deceive me. And because—" He stopped. "Because what?" He was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, some careful thing that had been locked away and was testing the door from the inside. "Because I saw you once," he said finally. 5 years ago, on the Miller Road outside of town. Do you remember?" Eliza frowned. 5 years ago, she'd been 27. She'd been coming back from the Pemberton farm with eggs, and she had encountered the woman, she said slowly, the old woman who was being harassed by those men at the crossroads. 3 of them, Colt said. They had her mule blocked. I was half a mile back on the road when I saw it. By the time I got close enough to intervene, you were already there." Eliza remembered. She remembered the sick, cold feeling of seeing it happening, the calculations she'd done in less than a second, 3 men bigger than her, probably armed, and a woman alone who couldn't get past them. She remembered that she had not felt brave. She had felt afraid and had done it anyway because the alternative was walking past. "You drove them off," Colt said. "All 3, with a basket of eggs and a voice like the second coming. I've never seen anything like it. Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. I tried to ride up and help, but you didn't need it. You had already made them feel ashamed of themselves, which I have always thought is more effective than a fist. Eliza stared at him. I asked around after that, he said. Found out your name. Thought about it for years, actually thought about what kind of woman does something like that. His voice went careful again. Then I needed a wife, and I came back to Coldwater Crossing, and there you were in the back pew. You came here looking for me specifically. I came here to make sure you still existed. He met her gaze. You still do. The fire crackled. Wind pressed against the windows. Eliza sat very still, processing the strange mathematics of this, a man who had watched her do something real, something that had cost her nothing but her composure and everything she had been taught about staying in the background, and had remembered it for 5 years. What would this arrangement look like? She said at last. Specifically, we marry before the month is out. You move to the ranch. You manage the household. We present a unified front to the community. In private, he stopped. In private, we live our own lives, separate rooms, no expectations beyond civility. And after the inheritance is secured, then the arrangement continues for as long as we both find it workable. His voice was measured. I won't touch you, Miss Holt. Not unless you want me to, which I don't expect. Eliza looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the ledger, about the 40 acres, about the battered household accounts, and Ruth's cold eyes and Iris's thoughtless beauty, and 17 years of mending other people's hems. She thought about what it would mean to have her own room, her own fire, her own corner of a life that was not borrowed from someone else's surplus. She thought about the way he had looked at her in the church, like recognition. There's something you should know, she said, about the arrangement, before you decide if I'm still the practical choice you think I am. He waited. My father owned 40 acres in the valley bottom, the best grazing land in this part of Bitterroot. I've found an entry in our old ledgers, a sale recorded in 1870. No buyer's name, no witness. She met his eyes. That land is in the valley bottom, Mr. Hargrove, south of the creek line. His expression did not change, but something sharpened in it. That land, he said slowly, is part of my south pasture. Yes. Eliza's voice was steady. I believe it is. Silence. You're telling me, Colt said, that before you agreed to marry me, I should know that your family's land may have been illegally sold to my family. I'm telling you because I won't build anything on a foundation of secrets. If you want a practical partnership, you deserve to know that this particular complication exists. She looked at him steadily. What you do with that information is your business. Colt was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. Wind howled. Can I think about it? Eliza asked. You have until Friday, he said, then after a pause. There's something else you should know. My former fiancée is returning to Coldwater Crossing, Genevieve Lawson. She's widowed now, and I'm told she intends to make a case for resuming things between us. His voice went flat. She'll try to convince you this marriage is a mistake. She'll try to convince me the same. And will she succeed? Colt looked at her then, really looked the way he had looked in the church, like a man checking a map against a landscape he already knows. No, he said quietly, she won't. He left. Eliza stood alone in the parlor for a long time. Then she went back to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and opened the ledger to the page with the land entry. She had told him, she had not planned to tell him, she had kept that secret close for 3 weeks, examining it from every angle, trying to decide what it meant and what she owed and to whom. And then she had looked at this hard-faced, careful, complicated man who had remembered her for 5 years because she had done a brave thing when no one else was looking, and she had told him. The strangest thing was that she did not regret it. Friday came with a hard freeze. Eliza stood in front of the turned-away mirror in her bedroom and spoke to the wall. You are 32 years old, she said. You have managed this household for 17 years on nothing. You will manage a ranch on a fair wage and a room of your own. She paused. You owe Ruth Holt nothing. You owe Iris Holt nothing beyond what you have already given. Another pause. You are allowed to say yes. She went downstairs and sent word to Colt Hargrove. The ceremony was performed at the church the following Tuesday, witnessed by Reverend Merritt and 2 ranch hands Colt had brought as legal witnesses. Ruth had refused to attend. Iris had refused to attend. The town had not been invited. Eliza wore her best dress, dark green, wool brushed, clean, mended at the cuff, but mended well. Colt wore the same long coat from Sunday. Snow fell softly outside the church windows. I do, Eliza said when the Reverend reached her part. I do, Colt said when he reached his. The ring he slid onto her finger was plain gold, heavy and real. You may kiss the bride, Reverend Merritt said with the tone of a man who is performing a legal function and has learned not to editorialize. Colt leaned in. His lips touched her forehead, not her mouth, brief and formal, a punctuation mark rather than a statement. Mrs. Hargrove, he said. Eliza Holt became Eliza Hargrove in 20 minutes with no fanfare, no celebration, and no certainty about anything except that she had made a choice, and for the first time in 17 years, the choice was entirely her own. The wagon ride to the Hargrove Ranch took an hour through cold white silence. Colt handled the horses. Eliza sat beside him with her single trunk in the back and the gold ring heavy on her finger. She watched the valley unfold around them, the mountains white with early snow, the creek line threading south through stands of cottonwood, the sky a pale, clear blue that felt almost offensive in its beauty. No regrets, Colt asked without looking at her. Too early to say. Something that might have been appreciation moved across his face. The house is large. You'll have your own wing, your own fire. He paused. My wing is in the east. Yours will be in the west. We share meals and public appearances. Beyond that, we live separate lives. Eliza looked out at the passing landscape. You mentioned, Moses will help you find your footing. His voice changed slightly when he said the name. He raised me after my mother died. He knows everything that happens on this ranch. And if I don't earn his approval, then you'll have one less ally in a house full of strangers. He glanced at her sideways. But I think you'll earn it. The ranch house rose from the snow like something that had grown there, solid stone and seasoned timber built to last through winters that would break less permanent things. Eliza climbed down from the wagon before Colt could offer a hand. Her boots hit the frozen ground and she stood still for a moment, taking stock. An older black man appeared in the doorway. His hair was white, his posture upright, his eyes sharp with the particular intelligence of someone who has been watching people carefully for a very long time. Moses, Colt said. This is Eliza, my wife. Moses looked at Colt, then at Eliza, then back at Colt with the expression of a man who has been waiting for something and is now assessing whether this is precisely what he had in mind. Your wife, Moses said. That's what I said. A pause, then something shifted in Moses's face. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, the muscles that would hold a smile in place if he let them. Well, he said. He came forward and took her trunk with a steadiness that suggested he had carried heavier things for longer. Welcome to Hargrove Ranch, Mrs. Eliza. He glanced at Colt with something that held 17 kinds of meaning in a single look. West Wing, I assume. Yes, right. Moses disappeared with her trunk. The West Wing was larger than the entire Holt house. Her room had a bed. She could get lost in a wardrobe with genuine space in it, a writing desk positioned by the window that looked out over the south pasture. The south pasture that had she now knew once been her grandfather's land. The fire was already burning. Someone had placed a small pottery vase of dried wildflowers on the writing desk. Is it acceptable? Colt asked from the doorway. She stopped. Tried again. It's more than I expected. Good. He started to turn away, then stopped. Dinner is at 7. I'll send Mary to help you dress. I can dress myself. I know. But you're the mistress of this house now. People will expect certain standards. He met her eyes. It's not a criticism. It's a context. He left. Eliza stood alone in the largest room she had ever occupied and looked out the window at the south pasture. The snow lay clean and white over land that had once belonged to her family. Under the snow, the grass was dormant but alive, waiting. She pressed her hand flat against the cold glass. Hello, she said quietly to the land below. No, I don't. I'm back. The first week was an education. Eliza learned the house the way she had always learned things, methodically, without fuss, filing each piece of information in its proper place. The names of the hands, the schedules, the supply chains and the maintenance needs, and the 12 different crises that needed managing at any given time on a working cattle ranch. She learned that Moses ran the indoor affairs with quiet authority and no ego, that the cook, Thomas, had opinions about his kitchen that were non-negotiable, and correct that the youngest hand, a boy named Pete, who could not have been more than 16, was not eating enough because he was sending his wages home to a mother in Billings. She arranged for Pete to receive double portions without making a show of it. Moses noticed on the third day he didn't say anything, but he looked at her with the expression of a man updating a calculation. On the fourth day, she found the discrepancy in the ranch ledgers. She was reviewing the accounts. Colt had handed her the ledger with the same pragmatic brevity with which he handed her everything, as if giving a competent person the tools they needed was simply the logical thing to do, and she found it buried in the cattle sale records. Someone had been shaving 10% off the top of every transaction for the past 3 years. The entries were neat, carefully done, designed to look like normal variants. But Eliza had been balancing books on insufficient data for 17 years. She recognized the architecture of a lie that had gotten comfortable. The transactions were signed by Decker Hargrove, Colt's cousin, the man who stood to inherit everything if Colt died unmarried. She brought the papers to Colt's study that evening. He was at his desk when she knocked, and he looked up with the startled expression of a man who was not accustomed to people knocking on his study door. She laid the papers before him and pointed to the column. Your cousin has been skimming from the cattle sales. 10% for at least 3 years. She stepped back. I can keep looking if you want. There may be more. Colt went very still, the kind of still that is not peace. He examined the figures for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind picked up off the mountains. My accountant has been reviewing these books for years, he said finally. Your accountant wasn't looking for theft. She gathered the papers. No one looks for what they don't think is possible. He looked up at her. You found this in 4 days. I found it in 2. I spent the other 2 making sure I wasn't wrong. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, not yet, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who had prepared himself for competence and received more than he'd bargained for. Do it, he said. Keep looking. She turned to go. Eliza, she stopped. Thank you. His voice was careful, deliberate, each syllable placed with intention. It was, she realized, the first time he had said her name. She carried it with her back to the west wing and sat with it at her writing desk while the fire burned low. Outside, the south pasture lay under its covering of snow, patient and quiet. Somewhere in the house, Moses was moving through the kitchen with his measured tread. From the east wing, she could hear nothing. Colt was silent in the way that large, quiet things are silent, not absence, but presence deliberately held still. She opened her notebook and wrote down every discrepancy she had found so far. Then she turned to a new page and wrote in her careful hand, why would Decker Hargrove risk his cousin's ranch for money? What else does he have a stake in? She thought about the 40 acres, about the land sale with no buyer's name. She began to form a theory. It was not a comfortable theory. She closed the notebook and went to bed and lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind and the sound of her own thinking. The second week brought Genevieve Lawson. Eliza was in the library cross-referencing the cattle sale records against the county land registry. She had found the registry in a locked cabinet in Colt's study, which Moses had opened for her without comment, and with a key he had produced from his vest pocket, as if he had been waiting for her to ask when she heard the front door. A woman's voice, high and musical and projecting at performance volume. Where is he, Nathan? I mean, Colt, I know you're here. Eliza set down her pen, smoothed her dress, walked to the library door. The woman standing in the entrance hall was beautiful in the way that some things are beautiful, precisely expensively with considerable maintenance. Blonde hair arranged in immaculate curls under a hat that had no practical business in Montana winter. Silk dress in deep blue, also impractical, also very effective. A face designed for maximum impact, which it was having. Behind the beauty, Eliza registered eyes that were slightly too bright, hands that were slightly too controlled. The particular tension of someone who has rehearsed this scene and is already off the script. Can I help you, Eliza said. The woman's eyes swept over her, the brown wool dress, the scar, the sensible hair, the complete absence of silk, and did the calculation with visible contempt. Who are you? Eliza Hargrove, Colt's wife. Eliza kept her voice even. And you're Genevieve Lawson. I've heard of you. The color shifted in Genevieve's face. His wife. The word landed like something she was trying to pick up and finding heavier than expected. That's not possible. He would never. He did, though. Eliza stepped back slightly from the doorway. He's checking the north pasture. He'll be back before dark. You're welcome to wait, though. I can't guarantee how long that will be. She paused. I'll have Mary bring tea. Genevieve's composure cracked slightly at the edges. Do you know who I was to him? Yes. Then you understand why I'm here. I understand why you think you're here, Eliza said carefully. Whether that's why you're actually here is a different question. She met the other woman's eyes. Genevieve, I'm not going to be cruel to you. I'd prefer we conduct ourselves like adults. But I'm also not going to pretend this conversation is other than what it is, which is you attempting to assess whether I'm a threat to whatever plan you've arrived with. A long pause. You're not what I expected, Genevieve said. No one ever is. Eliza turned and walked back toward the library. The parlor is down the hall. Mary will bring tea. That evening, she told Colt. They were at dinner opposite ends of the long table, candles between them, the careful geography of two people who have agreed not to intrude on each other's space, but are finding the distance slightly more negotiable than initially planned. Colt listened without expression. When she finished, he set down his fork. She'll come back, he said. I know. She left me for a man named Harrington because he had railroad money. Harrington died last year. His voice was flat and factual, the voice of a man who has processed something until all the feeling has been extracted from it. She's a widow now. I assume she's found that widowhood is more expensive than she anticipated. Eliza thought about her theory, about Decker, about the land sale with no buyer's name. Colt, she said, when your father acquired the south pasture, the 40 acres by the creek line, do you know who he bought it from? He was quiet for a moment. A private sale, 1870. My father didn't discuss the details with me. I was 16. He met her eyes across the table. Why? Because I think, Eliza said carefully, that the person who sold that land to your father may not have had the legal right to sell it. She paused. And I think Genevieve Lawson knows that. And I think Decker Hargrove may also know, which would explain why he has been siphoning money from this ranch for 3 years. He may be paying off someone who has leverage over him. The silence that followed was very complete. Explain, Colt said. She laid it out. The ledger entry in her father's records, no buyer's name, no witness. The date, 1870. The timing, 1 year before Colt's father acquired that parcel. The missing 10 years in the county registry, which she had found while cross-referencing a gap where documentation should have been, but wasn't, papers that had apparently been misfiled or lost. My father never mentioned selling that land, she said. He spoke of it as something he was holding for me. But there's an entry in the ledger that says it was sold. The handwriting in that entry. She paused. I've been looking at our household ledgers for years. I know Ruth's handwriting. Colt went very still. Ruth Holt, he said. My stepmother. Eliza's voice was steady. She married my father in 1868. The entry is dated 1870. My father died in 1874. So Ruth Holt sold your father's land without his knowledge or consent and pocketed the proceeds, and your father died never knowing. That's my theory. She folded her hands on the table. I can't prove it yet. Moses mentioned that your father kept original land records in a strongbox. He thought it was in the study somewhere. If the original bill of sale exists, it would have the seller's signature. Colt stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment looking out at the dark, and she could see from the set of his shoulders what it was costing him to stay still. If Ruth sold that land illegally, he said finally, then it was never legally yours to sell or mine to buy. Yes, which means technically, you don't have clear title to the south pasture. She kept her voice level. I know. I considered not telling you. He turned to face her. But you did. I told you the first day, and I'm telling you more now. She met his eyes. Because we agreed to be honest with each other. That was the arrangement. He crossed the room, sat down not at the far end of the table this time, but at the corner closest to her, close enough that she could see the details of his face clearly, the tension in his jaw, the careful management of something large and complicated behind his eyes. Moses and I will find the strongbox, he said. If the original bill of sale exists, we'll know what we're dealing with. He paused. And if Ruth Holt committed fraud, then we deal with it properly. Eliza looked at him. Together, that's what I said yes to, isn't it? A partnership. Something shifted in his face. Not quite warm still, not quite that, but the door of it slightly ajar. Yes, he said, that's what you said yes to. They found the strongbox 2 days later. Moses knew where it was, had known for years, had apparently been waiting for someone to ask. It was in the back of a wardrobe in Colt's father's old study, behind a false panel that Moses had built himself in 1862 when Colt's father had asked him to. Inside was the original bill of sale for the south pasture parcel, and the signature on the seller's line was not Eliza's father's name. It was Ruth Holt's. In 1870, Ruth Holt had signed as legal agent for the Holt family estate, a role that had never actually been granted to her because Eliza's father had been very much alive in 1870 and had signed nothing. She forged it, Moses said. He looked at the document with the expression of a man who is not surprised but is still disappointed, which is the particular exhaustion of someone who has seen too much of human nature. Or she found a notary willing to overlook the problem. Which is a crime, Colt said. Has been for some time, yes. Colt looked at Eliza. This land is yours, he said. Legally, whatever's been done since this land was never properly sold. Which means we need to be careful, Eliza said. Because if this becomes public, Genevieve Lawson will use it. Both men looked at her. She came back because she wants Colt, Eliza said. But wanting something and having leverage are different. Right now, she has one thing that might work against us. She can argue that this marriage is a fraud, that I married Colt to reclaim land I knew should be mine. She paused. Unless we move first. What do you mean move first? Colt asked. I mean, we address the land ourselves properly, legally, before Genevieve can frame the narrative. She looked at him steadily. You transfer a clear title to me, formalized, witnessed, recorded at the county courthouse. Not because I demanded it, because it was always mine and you're correcting a wrong. Then there's no leverage. There's just justice. Moses made a sound that was not quite a laugh. What? Colt asked. Nothing. Moses folded the document with great care. Just thinking that your father would have liked her. The storm came on a Thursday night fast and without warning. Eliza was in the library when she heard the wind shift, the particular sound that experienced Montana winters had taught her to recognize the sound of air that has been traveling a very long distance and is about to arrive all at once. She went to the window and looked out at a sky that had gone the color of pewter. Moses appeared in his doorway. Bad one coming. Colt's already riding out to move the herd to the lower pasture. He went alone. Eliza turned from the window. How long ago? 20 minutes. Get my coat. Mrs. Eliza. Moses. She met his eyes. Get my coat. She found Colt at the edge of the north herd fighting the first walls of snow alone. She rode up beside him, and he turned with the expression of a man who is genuinely surprised and is trying to decide whether to be grateful or furious. You shouldn't be here, he said. You needed help. She pulled her horse alongside his. The cattle are drifting east. We need to turn them before they hit the fence line. A pause, a gust of wind that said several things at once. You can ride in this. I was raised on a working farm, Mr. Hargrove. She gathered the reins. I've been riding in worse since I was 9. They worked the herds together for an hour, then 2. The storm came in earnest wind that stripped thought down to the animal essentials of cold and survival snow that turned the world to a wall of white. And still they rode, flanking the cattle, pushing them south toward the shelter of the lower pasture. Eliza's hands went numb. She could feel the cold in her bones in the deep places where warmth usually lived. She could barely see Colt beside her. She could see him only as a shape in the white, a presence she was tracking by sound and instinct. Then his hand found her arm. Line shack, he said into the wind, 2 miles east. They rode. The line shack was the size of a generous closet built from salvaged timber in practical desperation. It held a small stove, a supply of kindling, 2 blankets and a waterproof trunk, and almost nothing else. It held all of this exactly as they needed it to. Colt got the fire going. Eliza got her gloves off and held her hands toward the growing warmth until she could feel them again. The storm screamed outside. Inside, the fire found its rhythm. They sat against the wall, the only wall with room to sit in, shared the blankets because there was no logical argument against it. Colt's shoulder was solid against hers. He was still breathing harder than normal from the ride, from the cold, from whatever he was managing behind that carefully maintained face. Why did you come? He asked after a long time. I told you, you needed help. That's not all of it. She was quiet. The fire crackled. No, she said finally, that's not all of it. Then what is? She looked at the fire, at the orange and gold of it, the way fire always looks like escape and catastrophe at the same time. She thought about what it meant to tell the truth about what she had been doing for the past 2 weeks, telling this man things she had kept close for years, handing him the mechanics of her own vulnerability with the pragmatic certainty that he would not misuse them. I didn't want you to be out there alone, she said, in the cold, not knowing if... She stopped. If what? If you were going to come back. The silence that followed was the quietest thing she had heard in a very long time. Eliza. His voice was different. The careful management had gone out of it. I know, she said quickly. I know it's not what we agreed to. I know the arrangement. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just explaining why I wrote out. That's not what I was going to say. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. His profile was hard and familiar, and something she had without quite deciding to been memorizing for 2 weeks. The lines of it, the scar on his lip, the way he held his jaw when he was choosing words with more care than they usually got. I have not, he said, been entirely honest with you. She waited. I told you I chose you because you were practical, because you wouldn't expect feelings, because you were, he stopped, because I believed you were the safest option. He turned to look at her then, and what she saw in his face was not comfortable. It was the look of a man who has found something in himself he was not expecting and is not sure what to do with it. What I didn't tell you was that by the second day I had stopped wanting safe. She held very still. By the third day, he said, I was thinking about you at 4 in the morning when I had no reason to be awake. He looked away again. By the fourth day, when you came to my study with the ledger and showed me what Decker had done, I sat at that desk for 2 hours after you left, just trying to understand what had happened. What had happened? You, he said simply. You happened. You walked into my house with one trunk and a secret about your father's land, and you told me the truth when you didn't have to, and you found the fraud in my accounts in 2 days, and you rode out into a blizzard because you didn't want me to be alone in it. He shook his head slightly. I designed this arrangement to keep myself safe, and somewhere in the middle of it, I forgot to be afraid. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. I'm afraid, she said. I know. I have been afraid for 17 years. I learned to live with it, to pack it down and make it small and put it somewhere I didn't have to look at it. She looked at the fire. But what you're saying, if I let myself hear it, then what? She met his eyes. Then I have to want something again, she said. And the last time I let myself want something, I spent 17 years watching it be given to someone else. I know, he said again, not dismissing it, holding it. You said you're not afraid. I said I forgot to be afraid. That's different. He shifted slightly, and the blanket between them shifted with him closing the last few inches of distance. I'm terrified. I loved someone once completely. She looked at me like I was her future, and then she left me standing in front of the whole territory with nothing. His voice was even, but she could hear what it cost him. I swore I would never be that open again, that I would never let anyone that close. And now I'm in a line shack in a blizzard with my wife, he said. And I've been more honest with her in 2 weeks than I've been with anyone in 10 years, and I don't know what to do with that. The fire popped. Wind pressed against the walls. Eliza looked at this man, this careful, controlled, complicated man who had remembered her for 5 years, who had chosen her for reasons that kept revealing themselves to be larger than the ones he'd stated, who was sitting here in the dark, in the cold, and telling her things that clearly cost him considerably, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not loudly, not dramatically, the way ice thaws quietly over time in the warmth of something persistent. I'm not her, Eliza said. I know. I have no interest in leaving you for a better offer. She paused. There isn't one. Something moved in his face, startled, then something warmer. He stopped. Practical, she offered. It was going to be the most flattering thing anyone has said to me in 10 years. But yes, I suppose practical is also accurate. She almost smiled. It was close enough that she felt the shape of it. I don't know how to do this, she said. Neither do I. He turned toward her fully. But I'm willing to figure it out if you are. She looked at him for a long time. The fire between them, the storm outside, the strange mathematics of two people who had both decided independently and for very sensible reasons never to be vulnerable again, and were now sitting in a line shack in Montana reconsidering that decision together. Yes, she said, I'm willing. He kissed her. Not urgency, nothing so simple. It was the kiss of a man who has been holding something very carefully and is finally with enormous deliberation setting it down. She kissed him back the way she had decided to do everything in this new life, completely without apology. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. We're going to have to figure this out properly, he said. I know. Genevieve will try to. Let her try. Eliza pulled back just enough to look at him. I've survived worse than Genevieve Lawson. His laugh was short and genuine, and the first one she had heard from him that sounded like it had escaped rather than been permitted. Yeah, he said, you have. They made it back to the ranch the next morning when the storm had passed and the world was white and silent and everything looked like beginning. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Eliza was in the kitchen helping Thomas prepare the midday meal, not because it was required of her, but because Thomas made the best biscuits in the valley, and she had decided she wanted to learn when Moses brought it in. For you, Mrs. Eliza, from town. no return address. Her name in elegant practice script, the handwriting of someone who had studied at a good school. She wiped her hands, took the envelope, and went to the library. The words inside hit her with the force of something that had been falling for a while and had finally arrived. Mrs. Hargrove, the circumstances of your marriage to Colt Hargrove are not what they appear. It has come to my attention that the land in question, the South Pasture parcel by the creek line, was sold to Hargrove interests under fraudulent circumstances in 1870. As the party who holds documentation proving this fraud, I am in a position to demonstrate that your marriage was arranged expressly to conceal and perpetuate this legal violation. Furthermore, I have been advised by legal counsel that a prior arrangement between myself and Mr. Hargrove, never formally dissolved, may constitute grounds to challenge the validity of your union. I urge you to consider your position carefully. If you vacate the Hargrove property within 1 week, I am prepared to forego legal action. If you do not, I will be forced to pursue all available remedies. G. Lawson. Eliza read it twice. Then she set it on the desk and put both hands flat on the wood and breathed. The land documents. She had them. Moses had found them. The original bill of sale signed by Ruth Holt, fraudulent. She knew this. Colt knew this. They were already moving to address it. But Genevieve had documents too, and she had framed the narrative first. Your marriage was arranged expressly to conceal and perpetuate this legal violation. Not true, but not unprovable, false either without context, without the whole story. Eliza thought carefully. She thought about the line shack and what had been said there. She thought about Colt's face when she had told him about the land. Not anger, not the look of a man caught in a trap, but the look of a man confronting something he genuinely hadn't known and was trying to reckon with honestly. She thought about what Genevieve was actually after. Then she went to find Colt. He was in the South Pasture. She rode out to him, had learned the rhythms of his workday. In 3 weeks knew where he would be in the afternoon, knew the sound of his horse and the particular way he sat a saddle, which was the way of someone who had been doing it since before he had a choice. He saw her coming and turned his horse to meet her. She handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. His expression didn't change. She had learned that was where to look, not at his face, but at his hands. His hands tightened on the paper. She has the land documents, he said. Yes, Decker. His voice was flat. He must have told her or given them to her. That would explain the money he was moving. Not just skimming for himself, paying to Genevieve for silence or cooperation. Eliza had been working through this since the letter arrived. She's not just his client, is she? She's his partner. Colt looked at her. They planned this together, Eliza said. Genevieve comes back, claims a prior arrangement challenges our marriage. Meanwhile, Decker presents evidence of the fraudulent land sale and argues that I married you in order to reclaim property I knew was mine. Between the two of them, they have enough to make things very difficult. She paused. Unless we move first. You said that before, he said. Move first. We need to address the land, she said. Today, publicly. We go to the county courthouse, file the corrected title, make the transfer official. We do it before they can file anything. She met his eyes. And then we need to find out if Genevieve actually has grounds to challenge the marriage, or if that's a threat with no teeth. Colt was quiet. Genevieve and I were engaged, he said formally, in 1872. She broke off the engagement in 1873 before she married Harrington. His jaw was tight. I assumed that was sufficient. I didn't know there was a legal process. And apparently there wasn't one, or wasn't an official dissolution. Under territorial law, he said slowly, does a prior engagement supersede a marriage if it was never formally dissolved? I've been reading the territorial statutes. She had found them in Colt's study, a bound volume from 1876. The answer is possibly. If Genevieve can demonstrate the engagement existed and was never officially ended, she could petition for an annulment. She paused. But only if she files before we can counter the claim. He looked at her steadily. What's your play? Moses, she said. He raised you. He was there in 1872 and in 1873 when Genevieve left. She held his gaze. If there's anyone who knows the true history of that engagement, who witnessed it, how it ended, what was said, it's Moses. And if there is documentation of her abandonment of the engagement or witnesses who can speak to her voluntary departure, that would make her claim indefensible. It would at minimum make it a fight she can't easily win. Eliza paused. Colt, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. I always have. Did you know about the engagement's legal status when we married? He held her gaze without wavering. No, I believed it was ended. She left me. She married another man. I considered it over. He paused. If I had known there was a legal complication, I would have resolved it before proposing to anyone. She believed him, which she supposed was the point of having built their entire arrangement on honesty from the first day. Then here's what we do, she said. They went to Moses that evening. He was in the kitchen cleaning up after supper, with the unhurried thoroughness of a man for whom a job is simply a job to be done completely. He looked up when they came in together, and something in his face went careful. You've heard from Genevieve Lawson, he said. It was not a question. How did you know? Colt asked. Because she came by the road gate this afternoon while you were out with the cattle and asked to speak to me. Moses set down his cloth. I told her I didn't have anything to say to her. She told me she had documents that would destroy this household. He looked at Eliza. I told her she'd underestimated the household. Moses, Colt said. The engagement, 1872. Moses sat down at this kitchen table. He folded his hands. He looked at Colt with the expression of a man who has been waiting to have a certain conversation for a very long time and is not sorry it has finally arrived. Your father never liked her, Moses said. Genevieve Wells, as she was then, thought she was beautiful and calculating and looking at you the way certain kinds of people look at anything trying to figure out what it's worth. He never said so. He said it to me. Moses looked at the table. When she left when she chose Harrington, I saw something happen to you that I hope never to see again. You closed. Just completely closed. He looked up. Your father wrote a letter to her after she left. A formal letter, very specific, stating that he considered the engagement dissolved by her abandonment and that any further claims on the Hargrove estate or name would be considered an act of fraud. Colt went still. I never saw that letter. No. He didn't tell you, said you were hurting enough without adding more paper to it. Moses stood and crossed to the far end of the kitchen and opened a cabinet above the icebox that Eliza had always assumed held spare kitchen implements. From the back of it, he removed a flat wooden box. Inside the box was a sheaf of documents. He gave these to me for safekeeping, Moses said. Said if they were ever needed, I'd know when. Colt's father's letter was there. Formal witness notarized. The dissolution of the engagement, written in the clear hand of a man who had been very precise about the legal weight of his words. Also in the box, a copy of Genevieve's marriage certificate to Harrington. A letter from Harrington's estate dated after his death indicating the extent of his debts. And a third document, a letter from a land agent in Helena, dated 6 months ago, in which the writer confirmed that he had been contracted by 1G Lawson to research the Hargrove land holdings and specifically the south pasture parcel by the creek line. She's been planning this for months, Eliza said, since before Harrington died by the look of it. Moses set the documents on the table. She knew about the land because Decker told her. He needed leverage against Colt, he wanted the inheritance and the ranch, and he needed a way to challenge the marriage without looking like the one who arranged it. So he brought in Genevieve, Colt said. Gave her the land documents in exchange for what? A promise of the ranch if she succeeded in destroying the marriage. Or a percentage, Eliza said. He's been skimming for 3 years. He's methodical. He wouldn't have left this to chance. They looked at the documents. At the architecture of an elaborate scheme, constructed over months and years, built on old fraud and new greed designed to dismantle everything in this house. They don't know we have this, Eliza said. No. Colt looked at her. Genevieve doesn't know Moses kept these records. And Decker doesn't know you found the original bill of sale. Then we're ahead of them. She met his eyes. But only if we act before they do. They sent for a lawyer from Billings the next morning. Not the county attorney who was old and slow and knew Decker socially, but a woman named Patterson who had been practicing territorial law for 12 years and came with a reputation for being unmoved by social pressure. Patterson arrived in 2 days. She spread the documents across the library table and reviewed them in silence for an hour, while Eliza and Colt waited and Moses brought coffee. Your position is strong, she said at last, if you move immediately. The dissolution letter from your father is legally sound. The notarization is clean. Combined with Genevieve Lawson's subsequent marriage, which is itself documented, her claim to a continuing engagement is effectively void. Patterson looked at Colt. She can file, but she won't win. And the land? Eliza asked. Patterson turned to her. The original sale was fraudulent forged agent's signature, no principal consent. The land was never legally transferred. The title has been clouded since 1870. She paused. To clear it, you'd need to file a corrected title claim, present the original deed, and likely face a quiet title action. She looked between them. Given that you are currently married to each other, and given that Mr. Hargrove has indicated he wishes to restore clear title to you, Mrs. Hargrove, this is actually considerably simpler than it might otherwise be. How simple? Colt asked. I can file the papers this week. The transfer of title from the fraudulent sale to its rightful owner, meaning you, Mrs. Hargrove, can be recorded publicly. It's not instantaneous, but it's straightforward. Patterson paused. The more complicated question is Ruth Holt. The name fell into the room like a stone into water. She committed fraud, Eliza said. Her voice was steady. She had been sitting with this for days. Forgery, selling property that wasn't hers to sell. Yes. Patterson was direct. She did. Whether you wish to pursue that legally is a question only you can answer. Eliza looked at Colt. He looked back at her. No answer's just the space to find one. Not now, she said at last. Not unless she forces it. The confrontation came on a Thursday afternoon. Genevieve arrived in a carriage, not her usual dramatic entrance, but something quieter, more calculated, which was in some ways worse. She had a lawyer with her, a sharp-faced man named Albright, whom Patterson had emerged had crossed swords with before. She had a document case. She had the particular expression of a woman who has convinced herself she holds all the cards. Eliza met them in the entrance hall. Moses stood at the back. Colt stood beside Eliza. Mrs. Hargrove, Genevieve's voice was almost warm. I expected you might have sent for your own counsel. I have counsel, Eliza said, and she's in the library. Please come through. The tableau in the library was not what Genevieve had planned for. Eliza could see it, the slight recalibration behind the practiced expression, the reassessment of the terrain. Patterson sat at the library table, composed and methodical. The documents were arranged in front of her with deliberate clarity. Mr. Albright, Patterson nodded to the other lawyer. Shall we? What followed was not a drama. It was deliberately the opposite, a procedural dismantling document by document of everything Genevieve and Decker had built. The dissolution letter, formal, notarized, legally sound. Genevieve's marriage to Harrington documented evidence that she had voluntarily and completely abandoned any prior claim. The South Pasture Land original deed fraudulent sale, the corrected title already filed that morning in the county record. Albright tried twice to interrupt. Patterson ignored him both times. The engagement claim has no legal merit, Patterson said. The fraudulent land transaction has been publicly corrected and the rightful owner documented. If your client files suit, she will lose, and the process of that loss will make public documentation of her late husband's debts, the nature of her financial situation, and her prior arrangements with Decker Hargrove, who has himself been informed this morning that he is no longer welcome on Hargrove land and that evidence of his financial misconduct has been submitted to the county sheriff. Genevieve's composure cracked. You don't have, she started. We have the accounts, Eliza said. She kept her voice even. 3 years of them. Moses kept duplicates. Decker was not as careful as he thought he was. A silence. Genevieve. Colt's voice was not harsh. It was the voice of someone who has processed grief for a long time and come out the other side into something more exhausted than anger. We were young. I loved you completely, and you left. I've spent 10 years making peace with that. He paused. I don't wish you harm. I don't want to destroy you. But I will protect my wife and my home from anyone who threatens them, including you. Genevieve looked at Eliza. A long, measuring look, not contemptuous now, but assessing. The look of someone recalibrating who they are dealing with. You planned all of this, she said. No, Eliza said. I came to this house with one trunk and a secret I didn't know what to do with. Everything since then has been building something real. She met Genevieve's eyes. That's the difference between us, I think. You came here to take something. I came here to earn something. Another silence. Albright said something quiet to Genevieve. She listened. Her jaw was tight, her hands perfectly still. We'll be going, she said at last. And they went. The door closed. The silence that followed was the quiet particular to relief. Not comfortable, not triumphant, but the silence of a storm that has passed and left the world intact. Moses made a sound. When Eliza looked at him, she saw that his eyes were wet. Moses, she said. Don't mind me, he cleared his throat. 40 years I've been waiting for someone to sort that family out. He looked at Colt with something too complicated for a single word. You did well, boy. Colt, who was 38 years old and 6 feet tall and ran the largest cattle operation in Bitterroot Valley, said nothing. but the line of his jaw was different than it had been an hour ago. Eliza touched his hand. He turned. His face was open in a way she had learned to recognize, the expression that meant he had stopped managing what she could see and was letting it be visible. "It's over," she said. "Is it?" "Decker is finished. Genevieve has nothing left to use." She paused. "Ruth may still—" "Let me handle Ruth." His voice was quiet. "She committed fraud. If she tries to use the knowledge of that against us, she will have a lawyer's letter in her door within the week." He looked at her steadily. "But I don't think she will. I think she knows it's over." Eliza thought about Ruth, about 17 years of cold efficiency, of being useful and overlooked, of the particular cruelty of a woman who had decided that the only way to survive was to take. She did not feel warmth toward her stepmother. She did not feel forgiveness. She felt something more complicated, the recognition that some wounds don't heal and some people don't change, and that this is a fact like weather that you learn to live with. "I want to see the land," she said. "Now. Is the timing wrong?" He almost smiled. "No, come on." They rode to the south pasture as the afternoon light turned gold. The 40 acres lay between the creek and the ridge, sheltered from the worst of the north windgrass under the snow, that you could feel rather than see the particular richness of land that has been well tended for generations. Her grandfather's land, her father's land, hers. Eliza dismounted at the fence line and stood at the edge of it, her hands in her coat pockets, and looked out at the pasture in the winter light. "Your grandfather built that fence," Colt said, coming to stand beside her. "Moses told me, when he was first teaching me this land, he told me the south fence was the oldest on the property, built by someone who knew what they were doing. He built everything to last," Eliza said. "That was his way." She paused. "He died before I was born, but my father used to talk about him, said he was the kind of man who planted trees in whose shade he knew he'd never sit." Colt was quiet beside her. "I want to plant something here," she said. "Now, eventually." She looked out at the snow, something that takes a long time to grow. He reached out and took her hand, not urgently, not dramatically, just held it the way you hold something you have decided to keep. "We should talk about the arrangement," he said. She looked at him. "The original one, the practical arrangement." His voice was careful. "Whether the terms are still—" "They're not," she said. "No, they're not." He looked at her. "What are the new terms?" She considered. The wind came off the mountains, cold and clean and smelling of pine and distance. "This," she said, "what we're doing now." She looked at their joined hands, at the plain gold ring on her finger. "Partnership, honesty, riding out into blizzards for each other." She paused. "The rest we figure out as we go." That's a fairly open-ended contract. I've found that the best ones usually are. He kissed her then, standing at the fence line of her grandfather's pasture with the mountains white behind them and the winter sun going gold. And she kissed him back with the same completeness she had brought to everything in this new life of hers. When they broke apart, she was almost laughing, the same surprised, helpless laughter she had discovered she was capable of. Now the laughter that comes from someone who has been given back something they had stopped believing they were allowed to have. "What?" he said. "I was just thinking," she said, "about what everyone told me, about how a scarred woman from a failing farm had no business expecting anything from life. And now I'm standing on my grandfather's land." She looked at him. "With a husband who is extremely inconvenient about feelings." "I've tried to be convenient. Terrible at it." He laughed, the real one, the one that escaped. "Yes," he said, "I am." 3 weeks after the confrontation, Iris arrived. She came on horseback alone, carrying a small bag, and the expression of someone who has been working up to something for a long time and has finally arrived at the doing of it. Eliza met her in the courtyard. They stood looking at each other for a moment, the two of them. Iris golden and Eliza scarred, the way they had always stood together, the way that should have been rivalry, and somehow never quite was, under all the layers of household politics and inherited arrangements. "I want to apologize," Iris said. Eliza waited. "For all of it. For years of it." Iris's voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has practiced. "For letting Ruth treat you the way she did. For not saying anything. She stopped. "For the mirror." "The mirror." "I was the one who turned it back around," Iris said quietly. "Once, years ago when you were at market, I was curious. I wanted to see—" She stopped. "You found it turned around and thought you'd forgotten. I never told you it was me." Eliza looked at her. "I was 16, Iris said. And I was afraid of what I'd see, afraid that it would, I don't know, make it real in some way it hadn't been before. Her eyes were bright. What I saw instead was you. Just you. And I turned it back because I thought that was what you wanted. A pause with dawn. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe that was what I wanted. A long silence. Why are you here, Iris? Because Ruth went to see Genevieve Lawson, Iris said. I found out last week after everything had already been resolved, apparently, but still. She went to offer testimony. Against you. Her jaw was tight. I found the letter she wrote, offering to say that you had discussed the land situation before the marriage, that you married Colt knowing about the fraud. And she thought that was true. I don't know what she thought. Iris looked tired, suddenly older than 24. I think she wanted it to be true. I think she's been looking for ways to undo what happened since the minute Colt chose you over me. She paused. He didn't actually want me, you know. I understood that eventually. He never looked at me the way he looks at you. I think he was trying to figure out how to say no politely when Ruth positioned me in front of him. Eliza said nothing. He looks at you, Iris said, like you're the only solid thing in a room full of things that might shift. She paused. I wanted someone to look at me like that. I thought it would be him, but it wasn't, and it's all right. It's actually all right. A pause. I came because I didn't want you to hear about Ruth from someone else, and because I wanted... She stopped. Because you wanted what, Eliza said, to be your sister again. If there's still room for that. The wind came through the courtyard. Behind Eliza, the house was warm and full of the smell of Thomas's supper and the sound of Moses moving through the kitchen. There's room, Eliza said. Iris's breath went out of her in a rush. I brought a letter. From Ruth. She held it out. She wanted to apologize. I don't know if it's real or if it's calculated, but she asked me to bring it and I said I would. Eliza took the letter and put it in her pocket without opening it. I'll read it later, she said. Come inside. You can stay for dinner. She paused. Or longer if you want. Moses will put you in the blue room. That evening after dinner, after Iris had gone to bed, Eliza sat at her writing desk in the West Wing and read Ruth's letter. It was short, stiff, written in the careful hand of a woman who is not accustomed to apology and is finding the grammar of it difficult. It said, in essence, I know what I did. I am not proud of it. I cannot give back what I took. It did not ask for forgiveness. Eliza found somewhat to her own surprise that she was grateful for that. Forgiveness was a long project and she was not yet certain she was equipped for it. But honesty, the kind that cost something, the kind that arrived without ornamentation that she could recognize and hold. She folded the letter and put it away. Then she took out her notebook and began to write down everything she wanted to do with the south pasture. The grazing improvements, the fence repairs, the things she had been thinking about since she stood at the fence line with Colt in the winter light. Her grandfather's land, her land. She wrote for 2 hours. When she finally looked up, Colt was in the doorway. You're still at it, he said. I have plans. I noticed. He came in and looked over her shoulder at the notebook. His eyebrows rose slightly. You want to plant an orchard. In the southwest corner, it's sheltered from the wind. Good southern exposure. She looked up at him. Apple trees take 7 years to bear fruit. I know. I want to see them when they do. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled up the chair from the corner and sat beside her. Not at a careful distance, the way he had sat at the far end of the dinner table in those first days, but beside her close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Then we'll still be here in 7 years, he said, planning what to do with the apples. She looked at him. You sound very certain. I am. He took her hand. The gold ring glinted in the firelight. This is the part, Eliza, where you're allowed to be certain too. She looked at their joined hands, at the ring that had felt foreign 3 weeks ago, and now felt like it had always been there. At the man beside her who had come looking for a practical arrangement and had instead built something that neither of them had been brave enough to name until they were stuck in a blizzard with no other option. She thought about the scar on her neck, about the mirror she had turned to face the wall for 17 years, about the way she had taught herself to be invisible, to be useful, to be the person who stayed in the back pew and mended other people's dresses and expected nothing. She was not that person anymore. Or rather, she was all of those things, all that history, all those 17 years. But she was also this, the woman who owned her grandfather's land and was planting an orchard that would bear fruit in 7 years, who had ridden into a blizzard for the man beside her, who had told the truth when silence would have been easier, who had looked at everything she had been given and chosen to build with it rather than wait. "Colt," she said. "Yes. I want to see the land in spring. Then we'll see it in spring. And I want to—" She stopped. Tried again. "I've been invisible for a very long time, and I understand now that it was a choice partly. A protection." She looked at him. "I don't want to choose it anymore." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he raised her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. The scarred hand, the one that had been through fire and work and 17 years of making itself useful. "You never needed to be invisible," he said. "You only thought you did." "I know that now." "Good." He released her hand. "Then show me the orchard plans." She showed him. They sat together until the fire burned low, talking about apple trees and fence lines and the things they were going to build. And Eliza Hargrove, who had been the scarred one, the invisible one, the woman no cowboy wanted, sat in the warm circle of lamplight and understood for the first time that she had always been worth finding. She had simply needed to stop making herself hard to see. Spring came to Bitterroot Valley like a debt being paid. The snow retreated up the mountains. The creek ran high and bright with melt. The south pasture, Eliza's south pasture, turned green in the long Montana days, and the apple trees she had planted in the southwest corner, 12 of them small, and staked against the wind, put out their first cautious leaves. Moses came to look at them with her on the first warm morning of April. "Apple trees," he said. 7 years, she said. "You plan to be here in 7 years." "I plan to be buried here," she said simply. Moses made a sound. When she looked at him, his eyes were wet. "Don't," she said. "I'm not doing anything. You're about to say something that will make me cry in front of the apple trees." "I was going to say," Moses said with dignity, "that your grandfather planted the cottonwoods by the creek, and I think he would have appreciated the symmetry." She stood very still. "Did you know him?" she asked. "I knew of him. His reputation." Moses looked at the saplings, a man who built things to last. He looked at her. "You come by it honestly, Mrs. Eliza." She came by it honestly. She carried that with her through the spring, through the summer, through the long work of a cattle ranch that never stops needing tending, and the shorter, more intricate work of building a marriage in real time with two people who had both learned to protect themselves with walls and were now slowly, deliberately learning to use doors instead. Colt, it turned out, was terrible at receiving care. He could give, it could ride out in a blizzard for 60 cattle and come home to check on Pete's letter to Billings without being asked, and notice that Mary had been limping and arrange for her to see the doctor. But when it came to being on the receiving end, he had 17 years of practice at managing his own injuries in private, and he had not entirely stopped. Eliza dismantled this with patience, not in a confrontational way. In the way that someone dismantles something they love, carefully, slowly making sure each piece that comes loose is placed somewhere safe. The first time he came home from a difficult day and said nothing but sat in the study, staring at nothing. She brought him coffee, sat down on the other side of the desk, and read her own book in companionable silence until he was ready to talk. He talked for 2 hours. The second time she brought him the coffee before he got to the staring. The third time she didn't need to bring anything. He came to find her. In July, Patterson filed the final papers. The quiet title action succeeded. The South pasture was legally formally recorded in the county courthouse, Eliza Hargrove's. The fraudulent sale of 1870 was a matter of public record. The mechanism of it, the absence of proper consent, the clouded title, though, of Ruth Holt's name was mentioned only as the party who had signed without authority. Patterson, who had a lawyer's precise understanding of what could and could not be proven beyond the documents themselves, had been careful about that. Decker Hargrove pled to a reduced charge in exchange for cooperation with the county sheriff's investigation into the larger financial scheme. He was not in prison. The territorial system did not work with great speed on such matters, but he was financially ruined. The Hargrove name attached to his fraud in the county record, and he left for the east before the summer was out. Genevieve Lawson left Coldwater Crossing 2 weeks after the confrontation and did not return. Eliza did not ask where she went. It was not her problem. Ruth Holt was never charged with anything. Iris sent a letter in August saying that Ruth had gone quiet. The letter said, like something that has been wound too tight for too long and has finally unwound. Iris was managing the household now, and finding it, she wrote with some surprise, more satisfying than she had expected. She had started teaching reading to the younger children in town. "You would be proud of her," Iris wrote. "She is nothing like what I expected." "She is exactly like you," Iris wrote in the next line and crossed it out. But not completely. The words were still visible. Eliza kept the letter in her writing desk. The night of their first full year, Colt took her back to the line shack. It was October again, cold again, the mountains white again and the sky full of the particular deep blue of autumn evenings in Montana. He brought provisions, this time coffee, in a tin bread and apple each from the town market, because the orchard trees were 6 years from bearing. They sat where they had sat in the blizzard against the wall with a fire going. 1 year, he said. 1 year, she agreed. We survived Genevieve. We survived Decker. We survived the blizzard. We've survived approximately 17 separate crises involving cattle, she said. 18, the fence line situation in August. 18. She leaned against him. He put his arm around her shoulders with the ease of a man who has been doing this long enough that it no longer requires thought. Colt. I want to tell you something. She looked at the fire. When you came to the Holt house with your business of proposition, when you sat across from me in that parlor and said you were looking for a practical arrangement, I thought I understood exactly what you were offering. And now I know you were lying. She looked up at him. Not consciously, I don't think you knew, but you were offering me something that had nothing to do with practicality. She paused. You were offering me yourself, and you had been working up to that offer for 5 years without realizing it. He was quiet for a moment. I thought I was being rational, he said. You were being afraid, which is not the same thing. She reached up and touched the scar on his lip, the old one, the small one. He didn't flinch. Neither did she. We were both afraid. We built the arrangement as a kind of cover for what we were actually doing, which was trusting each other. And what were we actually doing? Choosing, she said. Just choosing, over and over, every day. He turned to look at her, and she saw the same thing in his face that she had seen in the blizzard, that open, unmanaged thing that he had stopped trying to keep from her. I choose you, he said, today, tomorrow, in 7 years, when the apple trees bear fruit. She pressed her hand to his chest, felt his heartbeat steady and strong and present. I choose you, she said, the same. He kissed her, and she kissed him back, and the fire burned between them, and the snow gathered quietly outside. And Eliza Hargrove, the scarred one, the invisible one, the woman who had spent 17 years believing she was not worth choosing, sat in the warmth of a life she had built and understood finally and completely that she had always been worth this. She had simply needed someone brave enough to say so first, and a line shack in a blizzard, and the patience to let trust grow slowly in the way of things built to last. Like apple trees, like fence posts cut from good timber, like love when it is real,